Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alvia Wardlaw, Director of the University Museum at Texas Southern University, and it's my pleasure to invite you to Texas Talks Art, where I will be speaking with the amazing artist and printmaker, Delita Martin. First, a little bit about Texas Talks Art. Texas Talks Art is an unprecedented multi-institutional initiative intended to introduce the work of artists across the state of Texas to a wider audience, taking the form of virtual 30-minute lunchtime talks. The series features 50 Texas artists and artist collectives in conversation with 50 Texas curators beginning in January 2021. Talks are free and take place every Tuesday at noon Central Standard Time. For a list of upcoming programs and more information, please visit texastalksart.org. Talks are recorded and archived. So without any hesitation, I want you to meet Delita Martin, who is an extraordinary printmaker, a Texas Southern University graduate and alumna of Texas Southern and Purdue University, who has created for herself an astounding career. And she is, as she just told me, has the goal of wanting to make everyone in the world a printmaker. And I don't doubt that she will reach that goal. Delita, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's wonderful to see you and to have this brief conversation. We have so much to talk about. Yes. And so many beautiful images that you've generously shared with us. But I did want you, before we get started with the slides, just to talk a bit about your art career and what made you focus on printmaking.
Wow. So I think I declared around 5 years old that I was going to be an artist. And I was going to go to Texas Southern. I was going to study with Dr. Biggers, and I was going to be an artist, and that was it. And so there was never a plan B in terms of being an artist. When I got to Texas Southern, Dr. Biggers was gone retired by the time I got there, but I was really excited to study Harvey, who I studied with while I was there. I majored in drawing. And we had the printmaking room, but we didn't have enough students for the classes, as I'm sure you're aware. But I came in on a Saturday to pick up my sketch pad out of my locker, and Dr. Biggers, Early Hutnall, and Charles Cryer, and Harvey Johnson were in the printmaking room.
Oh my God.
Dr. Biggers was reopening an edition that I think he did in like 1960s. And it was beautiful print. And I walked in, just kind of stuck my head in, but I always describe it as a magical dance because Dr. Biggers was sitting at the table signing prints. Charles and Kreiner were working on the stone together, and Hutnall was photographing. And I just kind of sat in a corner, and I remember thinking, there's all these acids and chemicals on the table, but yet this beautiful, delicate print drawing that was created. And I just made a mental note to myself that I was going to do that one day. I didn't know how or when, but I just knew it would happen. So I just kind of put that in the back of my mind. But that was my first introduction to printmaking, and it really sparked an interest. But I didn't go into printmaking until about a year or two after I graduated from Texas Southern.
But that was such an amazing historic moment. You were in the presence of like 4 giants in African American art and printmaking, and there you were. Oh my God, that was kind of a divine moment.
It was incredible because I just kind of sat in a corner. I was like, it was one of those larger than life moments for me. I knew then that I would get into printmaking at that point.
And your father was an artist, wasn't he?
Yes, he was an artist. He studied with Dr. Biggers, and that was my first introduction to art, was looking at his work. But I I really understood that he was an artist, because art was just something that was always done at our house. So my grandmothers and aunts were quilting. They were constantly telling stories. My father was painting, drawing. So everybody in the family was working in a creative capacity. So it was just business as usual for me.
That's beautiful. What an incredible legacy. And you are certainly extending that globally. And we will talk about that as we move through these wonderful images of your work. So why don't we get started? We can have the first slide. Well, while that's coming up, can you talk? Okay, here it comes. Thank you to all the supporters, and take note of the upcoming talks that will be happening in the near future. So this, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to show this, really excited. So I kind of wanted to talk about my transition into graduate school from undergrad. So this is totally not true, but in my mind, everything in drawing that I could possibly do. So it's like, I have to do something different. And so, of course, for me, printmaking was that natural first step. But it took me my entire first year of grad school, almost, probably close to the maybe first semester, half the second semester, to actually figure out how to translate my drawings into printmaking. So it wasn't a natural transition. It was something I really had to work at. And this was the first print that I pulled that was successful. All of my critiques up until that point were awful, rightfully so. But it just took time because the drawings didn't translate naturally, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm. But I still see your drawing, the fundamentals that you received at Texas Southern, they shine through in this print. This is beautiful.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is a piece that I did of my grandmother. And so I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. She was a quilt maker and a storyteller. And every evening after school, so I slept with my grandmother until I was like 12 years old. So we would quilt at night and she would tell me stories. And so this piece for me was really a traditional work. I had just left the university and decided to go into the studio full time. And I was trying to really challenge myself in terms of, how large the work was, my desire to combine drawing, painting, and printmaking. And just it was about getting in the studio and being a creator, and not just a printmaker, not just a draftsman, not just a painter, but being able to create. And so this was the first piece that I created after leaving the university. And it was just a very freeing moment for me, because I feel like I gave myself permission to be an artist.
Mm-hmm. So this is when you began to kind of expand the boundaries of printmaking, so to speak, and involve, because I think that's a kind of a aspect of your work that's central to its originality. I love the bird on this, and
well, we always kept birds at our house. My grandmother always, we had birds. We had horses, we had dogs and cats and turtles and raccoons and everything else. But my grandmother specifically loved birds. And so in my work, the bird represents the human spirit. And so there's always, there's a bird's presence in the work a lot. So that's one of the symbols that I use.
And quickly, Delita, what's the size of this?
That piece is around 40 by 60. So I work large. I didn't always work large. I was 18 by 24 or 22 by 30 when I was in graduate school. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was challenge myself in terms of size, challenge myself in terms of the various mediums. and just kind of just free myself really and not have the constraints of size. And that's
Right.
that was the beginning of that process.
Right.
Next slide. This is the bearer. This piece is a part of Crystal Bridges' collection. So initially, I left the university and I was really trying to figure out how to be a full-time artist and how that translation was, how to translate that art into a full-time job and love it. And so I had an exhibition at museum exhibition, and they were going to give me a small room. And I was like, well, you know, I have these larger works that I've been working on. And they were like, well, do you think you'll be able to have enough work for 1,200 square feet? And I was like, yeah, I got this. And then I fell apart after they left because I only really had the one piece, and that was the piece of my grandmother. But this piece came soon afterward. And so this is where we begin to see the stitching in the work, the patterns in the work. And this was the beginning, I think, of me developing how I work as an artist.
Your
Next slide.
original style. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
This is called Quilted Angel. And this was a piece that I did when the stitching really, really first came into the work. I was thinking about the quilts that my grandmother and I used to make. And so this is actual fabric that's been stitched onto the work. So all of the stitching in my work is hand done, is done by hand. It's this one stitch that my grandmother taught me. Some people know it as a whip stitch. She called it tacking.
So your works of art are a direct extension from that quilting experience that you grew up with your grandmother.
Yes. So
That's
a lot of the fabrics
beautiful.
that she had stories behind them. She would tell me, you know, she would use our old clothes. She would use clothes that were given to her from family members and other people, but she would always have stories. And so I began to associate patterns and fabrics and objects with people, places, and things. And so that became my visual vocabulary, were these objects and patterns and fabric.
Well, you know, I think of the quilt makers of Gee's Bend that I worked on when I see this. I mean, it's all so rich, and every artist who does quilts that I know, that storytelling is part of the creativity.
Yes.
But I didn't know that the stitching you got from your grandmother.
Yes.
We should keep moving because these are also wonderful.
Next slide. So this is where I use the direct pattern that she used for what she called her Rocky Mountain quilt. So those are all pieces of fabric that have been folded in triangles and stitched onto the work. And so this is Queen, and a little girl that has a quilt on for her cape. And she's a queen, and her hair is also stitched as well. So
she's very she has a presence about her. Undeniable.
Next slide, please. So these are from a series called Transitions. And these are, I did several portraits for an exhibition, and I fell in love with relief printing, which was the first process that I learned in graduate school. And I went on to work in all of the various print mediums, but these are some portraits that I did. These are linoleum cut prints. So.
I love the kind of aura that you have around the portrait of the girl, number 9. It's amazing how that light, you know, you've controlled that with the linoleum cut. These are so strong. So do you still do linoleum prints?
Yes, I do. I work in Sheena wood, and I work with Battleship gray linoleum, and sometimes I combine them depending on what textures I want and what I'm trying to accomplish. So,
okay.
Next slide, please.
Wow.
So this piece was really special to me. I actually, when my father passed away, I inherited all of his art supplies. And so I have a tendency to make patterns out of objects and things that I have. And so I used all of his art supplies for this piece, and the hair, like in particular, is actually a pencil sharpener. I used that to create the pattern in the hair.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so I'm all about making blocks out of any and everything possible.
Hmm.
So if I can put some ink or paint on it and transfer it to a different surface, I'll go for it.
So how did you do the pencil sharpener? I just have to ask, how was that?
So if you look closely, you have the two holes. I
Right.
literally just rolled it up with ink, put it in ink, and printed it, just used it in a stamp like fashion for the hair.
Mhm.
So next slide, please. So the circle is a pattern that you'll see in my work a lot. Well, actually, not even a lot. Every piece that I have, you'll see the circle. So the circle is a symbol of the moon, and the moon represents the female. There's always a female presence in all of my work, whether it's male or female. And so that's just a repeated pattern. And I wanted to show you that this is what piece that you can see it in very clearly. And I also use the honeycomb pattern, which talks about family and family connections as well. So you can kind of see the honeycomb pattern in the background.
Mhm. There's such an beautiful gaze that she has, Delita. Can you just speak briefly about how
Yeah.
you get these expressions on your subjects?
So in the beginning, my works were made up literally of various women in my community. You can see my mother's eyes, you can see my grandmother's smile, or the lady down the street, because I grew up in very much that village type. It takes a village to raise a child. And so all these women you will find in my work. And I remember being at Texas Southern, and Mr. Johnson always told me that, to always start with the most interesting part, whatever you're wrong with an individual. And for me, it's always the eyes. I truly believe that it's the window into the soul. And so it's always important for me to start with the eyes, and everything else will follow.
That was
Next
wonderful
slide,
advice.
Yes. So this is another piece from the Transition series. And so here I was looking at self, and also looking at my visual vocabulary, which talks about the women. So the spoon, I use like place settings, like the spoon, the knife, and the fork to represent family units. And the spoon represents the female and represents nurturing in my work. So you get a glimpse of the individual, but you also get a glimpse of who they are in a more symbolic way.
And the spoon reminds me of a drinking gourd.
Yes.
There's so much
This was a wooden spoon
Mhm,
that
mhm.
I had in my studio.
And then what I love about this is the patterns, the braided patterns of the subject's hair. Her hair is so intricate and beautiful, kind of juxtaposed against that brocade in the background behind the spoon. It's really very visually, just very beautiful.
Next slide. So always my first love. And then there's printmaking, and and I don't know, sometimes I think they places. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I define printmaking? And when I think about printmaking, literally transferring one pigment from one surface to another surface, but really thinking about pushing the boundaries of printmaking. And so this is an installation piece that I did. I was definitely inspired by Judy Chicago's piece, The Dinner Party. But in looking at that piece, I personally found problematic because I felt like it was, there was this exclusion that happened in the work. And I'm like, how can I work with, a similar concept, but more inclusive? And so in doing so, I thought about what would it be like to be around 300 women that I know personally in just one room. And so I did 300 portraits of women that I knew. And at first it was going to be family. And then I had to think, well, what does family really mean? And it became important to even just talk about people. Someone could say good morning to you and it could change your entire world. So some of these women I've known all my life. Some of these women I have known for 10 minutes, but I've had some sort of interaction with them. And
I
that's
remember
relate to printmaking.
it was
So
an
in relate,
extraordinary, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say it was an extraordinary exhibition. And I remember seeing it and recognizing all the women that I knew, you know, and it just was very, very personal. And seeing myself there
Yeah,
among these legends
yes,
was
it was
really
pretty
very special.
amazing
It was very
because
intimate. It really
I
was.
got to see, I figured out just through working with the women that a lot of people knew each other that I didn't know knew each
Mm-hmm.
other. So it's like looking at Facebook 3D because I could take a string and just draw it around in all these different connections. But in terms of how this relates to printing, thinking the idea of repetition. So all the plates are white or some variation of white. There are some details which I didn't mind as long as it wasn't distracting. All the portraits are using litho crayons and still using printmaking materials. And so when I look at this installation, I think of it as a varied edition of portraits. And so then I was like, well, how do I invite the viewer to be a part of this? And I put a table there and I invite people to sit down and just conversate, just talk, something that we really just more.
We do. We do. Well, speaking of 10 minutes, I want to get through all of these
Yes.
rest of the images. So that's okay. I like it. This is very rich. So I want to ask you about this one.
So I had stayed away from self-portraits for a really long time. And this was one of the first self-portraits that I'd done since probably graduate school, maybe, or right after undergrad. And so I was working on a show that I was doing here in Houston. And I wanted to see what it would be like for me to be in the veilscape. What I figured out is doing portraits of myself and doing portraits of women that I know personally in the veilscape. It's really, it was a really immersive, overwhelming moment to see myself become a part of the work because I'd never really looked at myself in that way.
And the mask?
The mask serves as a transitional object that allows the women and myself to transition between the waking world and the spirit world.
Okay, very striking.
Next slide. This is another piece that I did. I started bringing in more blues and more blues in a more obvious way. Blue is a spiritual color for me. You will find it in all of my palettes. And I'm also at this point beginning to bring in jewelry, found vintage jewelry, found jewelry, and stitching that into the work as well.
These blues are extraordinary. I think that's another kind of hallmark of your work, the way you incorporate all these different shades.
Blue always centers me. Drawing and the color blue when I need to really refocus and get back to where I need to be. That's when I'll go in the studio with the intentions of working on a blue piece of work or working on a drawing in order to center myself.
Great.
Next slide. This is a piece that I did for my latest exhibition that was in Beaumont at the museum there, East Texas Museum. This young lady is, I did a virtual model call during the pandemic. And so beautiful, beautiful young lady. She's in Brazil, and we did a Zoom, and we screenshot, and she to me, and she
Wow.
became one of the pieces. So
Never
yeah.
thought about a virtual model call. That's interesting.
Pandemic, you got to be creative.
So, I mean, but you were able to get the sense of the volume of her body and all the aspects.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
what I did was I very specifically, I spoke with each woman, all of the women that I chose. I spoke with them. I talked to them about the project I was working on. I spoke with them about, spirituality and where they were in their journey. And it helped me to be able to actually draw them, because
I see.
Mr. Johnson always told me, you can't draw something that you don't know anything about. And if you don't know anything about it, you need to figure it out.
Wow. Again, good advice for Mr. Johnson. Okay, I
Yeah.
think New Beginnings is the next.
Yes, New
Oh.
Beginnings is myself. In this image, this is a self-portrait where I am actually interacting with a spirit figure. And I chose the color green. Again, you see the blue in there, spiritual color, but just this, I felt like I was at a place in my career as an artist that I was beginning new, that I was able to start fresh. There were new concepts and new ideas that were coming into the work. And this is where I began to really just see myself in that spiritual world, and the self-portraits become more frequent at this point.
The composition and the selection of color, like the mask, kind of stands out because the tone is so different.
That mask is created from print that I did in graduate school. And it's actually a slave ledger is printed on that mask.
Wow.
And just the idea of someone being identified by the price of how much they cost, that's your identification. So at its core, a lot of my work, all of my work really is about identity, spiritual identity.
That gives another layer of meaning to it. So I think we've got about 6 more, Delita, and we want to have a few questions.
So I very rarely do portraits of men. This is my son. This is a piece I did of him called Sun and Saints. And so you see him with the universe. He is a part, he's our future. And he is being guided by his spiritual guides, the birds, the spirits. And I chose the pattern for his shirt because it looked like a verse. And so that's a piece there.
And again, the eyes, it's all there.
Next slide, please. This is my husband. It's called Delita Kings. And I finally got him to pose for me, this act of Congress, to get him to pose for me. But I was really excited. It's actually in the permanent collection for the Women's Museum. Very again, nice. You see the circles in there.
So how long did your son and your husband, how long did they pose for these works?
I actually kept them in the studio probably about an hour posing, just for the rough sketch. And then I took some photographs also. So I worked from live and from photographing. So next slide. So this is a special project that I'm working with High Point Press in Minnesota. And these pieces are called, there are 7 actual portraits, and this is called Keepsakes. And Keepsakes is portraits of little girls. And this is actually a portrait of me when I was a little girl, but it's about adultification and how, a lot of times our children are forced to grow up a lot faster than they are. So it's really about, how do we hold our children precious, keeping them precious? And so I went over time and found these christening gowns, vintage gowns, which we made into collagraphs and printed. This is a litho collagraph and stitching.
And for those who don't know, what's a coleograph? Just
A
briefly.
coleograph plate is a plate that's created using objects, found objects,
see.
papers. So we literally cut the dress in half and glued it to a metal plate surface and printed that. We rolled it up with ink and printed that.
It's so delicate and so almost timeless. It's just a beautiful original work.
Thank you. Next slide, please. This is my mother's bowl self-portrait. So I started doing a series of self-portraits. The pandemic has really been just crazy on us. And my mother passed away. And so I was talking to a friend of mine and I was telling her, you know, I needed to see myself. And so I started doing these portraits as a way of kind of dealing with my mother passing and my brother passing. And she made a comment. She said to me, you need to see yourself because your mirror is broken. And it made perfect sense to me. And so I started a series of self-portraits, and this is one of the first ones.
That's a beautiful testimony to what you received from your mother and your grandmother.
Yes. Next portrait, please.
This I really want to hear about. And I know we're running out of time, but just.
So very briefly, Rice University reached out to me in reference to doing a mural on one of their portable buildings that they have. And it's a series that they're doing for a while. So I proposed to them an outdoor meditation space. And some place that the students and community can go and just have a conversation and just be, you know, as immersed in art as they possibly can. And so this is called The Gathering, and you have a figure with a mat wearing a transitioning into the spirit world, and you have an actual person that's transitioning as well. And so you see the mason jars that's in the work, which is another symbol I use that talks about the illusion of freedom, where you can see freedom, but you can't quite grasp it because you're in the container. And so, so I just wanted to create a space where people could go and sit. And we did a platform that picked up the veilscape from the mural, and we put bean bags out so the students could have somewhere to sit.
So is it still at Rice? I mean, is it a permanent?
It is still, yeah, it's gonna be there probably maybe several more months. I'm not sure when it's.
I have to go find it.
But if you have an opportunity, yes.
Absolutely. Everyone watching should go and meditate. I mean, this is just splendid. I think there's one more.
My
favorite.
Goodness. Oh, so this is Dr. Alvia Wardlaw. So I call this piece Alvia, but I was honored and so nervous about creating this piece. I mean, it was when they asked me to do this for you, I was like, of course. And then I paced around the studio like, oh my God, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? But it has to be perfect. I don't know. And so I remember you telling us once that your favorite flower was birds of paradise. And so the blue pattern that you see is a bird of paradise and a silhouette of that flower. And so I was like, how do I make this be her? And so here you are.
I'm speechless again, Delita, the way I was that night at the Art League. This was so very, very special. And, you know, it's just extraordinary that you have captured this image of me, which speaks so much about, because blue is a color for me that's grounding, you know, so when they unveiled this, I was, oh my goodness, and my whole family just loves it. And everyone who comes in is like, And the earring reminds me, I think I told you of an earring that my son brought me from the St. Mary's Bazaar. When he was 7, he bought a pair of earrings. So it just connects in so many different ways, but I can't say how proud and honored I am to.
So the earring, I was in Cuba and I purchased some vintage brooches from the flea market there. And so when I saw the picture of you, I was like, I have to pull one of the jewels. So.
Well, thank you. It just is something that is very, very special to me. And I just want to thank you for sharing all of this. We've gotten a lot of comments. Dr. Bateman was saying that the rice mural is so beautiful at night. So I think I'm going to go over there in the evening to take a look at that. And then others were thanking you. And there was a question, I didn't see the full question, but one observer wanted to know how you applied on the dinner table, how you applied the images onto the plates. What was that process?
I drew them directly on using a litho crayon, and I did not seal them. What I found was working on the plates, I had probably 24 hours to make any changes that needed to be made. It kind of sealed itself. It's almost impossible to remove the image once it sits. If I'm working like immediately, I can rub off an area with no problem. So the longer the image sat on the plates, the more stable it became.
I see. And I know
they're directly drawn on.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're so creative, so imaginative, and so generous. Can you end by just telling us a little bit? I mean, you've been on the cover of Arts and Leisure in the New York Times and have been in Germany with your residencies. You're doing so many things. And I just commend you for that, Delita. But you also have a vision for other printmakers. Can you talk about what you're doing at your compound?
I'm doing a couple of things. So during the pandemic, we started Black Box Press Foundation, and the foundation is set up to help artists realize exhibition dreams, exhibition opportunities. So my organization is partnering with other galleries, other organizations to host this for exhibitions. We grant the artists a $5,000 unrestricted grant for them to use toward creating a body of work. So the artist doesn't have to look for funding, and they also have a space for the exhibition. So all they have to do is go in and create a work. Another component of the foundation is an artist residency. So currently I am doing invitational only residencies in my own personal studio, but we have purchased land and we are getting ready probably within the next year or so to build another printmaking studio where individuals will be able to apply for residencies, week-long to long residencies at that space. So a gentleman asked me once during a talk, totally threw me off, what I wanted my legacy to be. And I'd never been asked that before. And I gave some answer, but I did come back to my studio and think about it. And I figured out that I want to be for other artists what Elizabeth Catlett, John Biggers, Doc Thrash, Jim Dine, all these artists that I've studied and read about. I want to be for other artists what they were for me. They were a resource for me. So in any way that I can be a resource, that's what I want to do. I look at that as my retirement. And I'm looking forward to that. Is that's my idea.
A very active retirement.
Yes, it's being
That's
able
so
to
beautiful.
Help other artists. Yeah.
Delita Martin, thank you for your vision, for your talent, for your generosity. It's just been a wonderful 30, 40 minutes to just spend time looking at your works and talking with you. We're also proud of you and look forward to the many things that you're going to be doing in the future. I don't doubt that this vision will continue that you gained from your mother, your grandmother, your father, everyone. Thank you for sharing your
Yes.
story. And
Thank
thanks
you.
to all of you all for joining us and for your great comments and questions. And thanks to Texas Talks Art for inviting us here. Again, thanks, Delita.
Thank you so much.
All
Thank
right,
you.
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.